The dust rose thick in the air as the auctioneer's voice cracked under the sun, calling numbers like they were nothing more than grain prices. And the man standing at the edge of the crowd felt his stomach twist with every word. His name was Samuel Carter, a poor widowed farmer with 3 children and a land that barely yielded enough to keep them alive. He hadn't come to buy a soul that day. He had come to sell his last mule, but desperation has a cruel way of changing plans. When the gavel struck and the auctioneer sneered, 3 women, unwanted, sickly. "No bids, $50 takes all," the crowd laughed. No one wanted them. Too thin, too quiet, too broken. But Samuel saw something else. He saw eyes that still carried fire, hands scarred by work, and silence that spoke of dignity crushed, but not destroyed. $50 was everything he had left. It was his children's winter food. It was seed for spring. And yet, something heavier than hunger pulled his hand into the air. The women didn't cry when he bought them. They didn't thank him either. They simply followed him, chains clinking softly, as if freedom was a word they no longer trusted. On the long walk back to his farm, Samuel didn't speak much. He didn't know how to explain that he had no intention of owning them the way the world expected. He had no grand plan, only a belief, fragile, trembling, that no human being should be priced lower than an animal. When they arrived, his children stared wide-eyed from the porch. Samuel knelt and said quietly, "They are not things. They are guests, and they will be treated as family." That night, he unlocked the chains and placed the keys on the table. The women stared at them unmoving. Freedom offered too suddenly can feel like another trap. Days passed, then weeks. The women worked, not because they were forced, but because work was all they had known. One cooked, another healed with herbs she somehow knew by memory, and the third sang softly at night, songs that made Samuel's children sleep without fear for the first time since their mother died. The land began to change. Crops grew where nothing had before. Illness faded. Laughter returned, cautiously at first, like a wounded animal testing the air. Samuel noticed it too, the way his home felt fuller, warmer, almost protected. But the world beyond his farm was not kind. Whispers spread. Men came asking questions. $50 had purchased more than 3 lives. It had purchased danger. And Samuel would soon learn that doing the right thing often demands a price far greater than money. The trouble came quietly, like a shadow stretching longer each day. A man from the town rode up one morning, his smile thin, his eyes sharp. He spoke of laws, of ownership, of consequences. Samuel listened, his jaw tight, as the women stood behind him, not hiding, not begging, just standing. That was when Samuel did something no one expected. He pulled the deed papers from his pocket and placed them on the table. "They are free," he said. "If you want them, you'll have to take them by force." The man laughed. But laughter fades when courage doesn't. The women stepped forward then, one by one, and spoke, not of pain, but of choice. They chose to stay, not as property, not as servants, but as family. That night the farm was attacked. Fire lit the sky. Chaos screamed through the fields. Samuel was beaten, left bleeding in the dirt. And as darkness closed in, he thought he had failed everyone. But when he woke, he saw his children alive. The fire was out. The attackers were gone. The women sat nearby, bruised, exhausted, but unbroken. They had fought. They had protected what little love they had been given. In the weeks that followed, the town changed its tone. Fear turned into respect, then into shame. The women eventually left, not because they were pushed away, but because freedom had finally become real. Before they went, they left gifts no money could buy, knowledge of the land, bonds of love, and children who now understood compassion instead of cruelty. Years later, Samuel's farm thrived. His children grew strong, kind, and brave. When asked how he survived after losing everything, Samuel would say only this: "I spent $50 on 3 lives, but they gave my family a future." And somewhere beyond the horizon, 3 women walked free, not because they were bought, but because someone finally saw their worth. Time never truly erases a story like Samuel Carter's. It only buries it under silence until the right moment brings it back to the surface. Years passed, seasons changed, And the land that once struggled to breathe now flourished as if it remembered the hands that had healed it. Samuel grew older, his hair turning silver, his body slower, but his eyes still carried the same quiet fire. His children were no longer children. They had grown into people shaped not by wealth, but by a lesson carved deep into their bones, that dignity is not granted by law or chains, but by choice. Yet on some nights, when the wind moved through the fields just right, Samuel would hear echoes of the past, soft singing, whispered prayers, and the sound of footsteps leaving at dawn. The three women had gone, but they had never truly left. They lived in the way the family treated strangers, in the way the children spoke to the weak, and in the way Samuel still left the porch light burning every night, just in case. One winter evening, a stranger arrived, thin and tired, carrying news Samuel never expected. The world beyond the farm had changed, but not enough. Slavery still wore new masks, debts, threats, desperation, but the women Samuel had freed had become something dangerous to cruelty, witnesses. They had spoken in towns, in churches, in gatherings where people finally listened. They never used Samuel's name for praise. They used it as proof that one decision could fracture an entire system of evil. The stranger handed Samuel a small cloth bundle. Inside were three simple tokens: a carved wooden bird, a pressed herb wrapped carefully in paper, and a strip of fabric embroidered with a familiar song. No letter, no explanation. None was needed. Samuel closed his eyes and felt something he hadn't allowed himself in years. Peace without pain attached to it. Not everyone remembered the story kindly. Some still called Samuel foolish. Some said he was lucky. But when hardship returned, as it always does, his family endured differently. When crops failed elsewhere, theirs survived. When sickness spread, knowledge passed down saved lives. When hatred rose, their home became a place of refuge. People began to understand that what Samuel bought for $50 was not labor, not obedience, not ownership, but transformation. The women had given more than protection or help. They had given a way of seeing the world that refused to rank human souls by price. And that gift echoed far beyond one farm. As Samuel's final days approached, he asked to be carried outside, beneath the open sky. He watched his grandchildren run through the same fields that once nearly burned to ash. With a faint smile, he whispered words no one else heard, thanking three lives the world had tried to erase. When he passed, the town gathered, not to judge, not to whisper, but to honor. And long after his grave settled into the earth, his story continued to travel, carried by voices like yours, by listeners who chose to remember.